The best intelligence is recognizing one's own limits. Peter Bevelin. If you've ever believed you were thinking correctly, only for the outcome to be disastrously wrong, where does the problem lie? Insufficient knowledge? Emotions taking over? Or an unconscious mental model you didn't even know you were using? You may have read dozens of self-development books, memorized logical thinking techniques, and practiced emotional control. Yet one quiet question remains unanswered: why? Despite good intentions and ample knowledge, humans continue to judge incorrectly time and again. This book has no ambition to cure the deficiencies of human intelligence. It does not portray thinking ability as some all-powerful light. On the contrary, it points directly at the dark regions where instincts, biases, and even excessive cleverness secretly distort the way we see the world. Seeking wisdom is not advice, it is a complex map drawn from mistakes, a map that highlights the deep pits most of us have fallen into, sometimes repeatedly, without ever realizing it. Do you dare read this book as if holding a mirror up to yourself? And if you see a face distorted by long-held illusions, do you have the courage not to look away? If so, continue. But do not expect comforting words, only the cold but necessary precision of a mental examination. We encourage listeners to buy and read the full book to experience its complete content. For now, let us begin the summary. Part 1. What influences the way we think? We often think of ourselves as rational beings who make decisions based on data and logic. But if you've ever argued with a friend about politics, stocks, or football, you felt an invisible force shaping thoughts, sometimes stronger than facts themselves. I wrote this book not to teach you how to think correctly, but to help you understand why you so often get it wrong. I became fascinated by seemingly simple questions. Why do two people with the same information reach completely opposite conclusions? Why do we repeat the same mistakes even after paying a very high price? And how can we overcome our own limitations to think better? To answer these, I did not turn to shallow self-help books. I looked to Charles Darwin, who spent his life observing nature and humans with unflinching, cold eyes. I looked to Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's right-hand man, who relentlessly dissected his own errors like a surgeon. I observed human behavior the way a biologist watches whales from afar, patiently and without judgment. We begin with what seems simplest: the brain. This biological structure, with billions of neurons, chemical reflexes, and electrical signals, is the machine that processes everything we call the world. Yet the machine has limits. We cannot see the full picture, cannot remember every detail, and are constantly influenced by invisible forces, emotions, memories, personal beliefs. Imagine walking into a room full of strangers. You instantly scan to assess who is safe and who might be a threat. Those judgments do not come from logic, they come from instincts evolved over millions of years, recognizing faces, reacting to eye contact, remembering body odor. We do not think like machines, we feel, react, and only sometimes rationalize afterward. Darwin once wrote, "It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent, it is the one most adaptable to change." Adaptability comes from constantly learning from the environment. Ironically, though, our brains are wired to love familiarity. We repeat old behaviors, believe old stories, and fear what is different. That is a paradox. To adapt, we must change, yet to feel safe, we cling to the old. That is why the same event can produce completely different interpretations. Consider reading the news. Two people read the same article. One feels outraged, the other remains calm. Not because the article differs, but because their mental filtering systems differ. We do not see the world as it is. We see it as we are. Another factor shaping thought is culture, not music or food, but the invisible beliefs absorbed from family, society, and media. If you grew up in a family that believes success requires struggle, you will view leisure with suspicion. If taught that money is the root of evil, you will feel guilty earning a lot. If society values degrees over intelligence, you learn to hide ignorance rather than be curious. A famous experiment illustrates this. Scientists showed the same picture, a rural scene with a large fish swimming among smaller fish, to groups of Japanese and Americans. When asked what they saw, Americans typically said, a big fish. Japanese described the entire scene, the water, the small fish, the context. Culture programmed them to notice different things, individual versus background. This leads to a crucial question: if biology, emotion, and culture all shape our thinking, is there really such a thing as objective thought? Or is it an illusion? And if it is an illusion, how can we trust our own decisions? The problem is not that our brains are wrong, they are designed to make fast decisions, sometimes faster than conscious awareness. Back in primitive times, a rustle in the bushes could be wind or a predator. The person who ran without hesitation had a better chance of survival than the one who stopped to analyze. Thus we evolved to prioritize reaction over analysis, and that mechanism remains intact. Even today, when the bush is just a social media post. But that speed is a double-edged sword. It causes us to label people at first glance, lock in opinions before understanding the full picture, and repeat old patterns, not because they work, but because they feel familiar. When challenged, instead of questioning, we reinforce wrong beliefs by seeking confirming evidence, a mechanism called confirmation bias. Imagine you believe a stock will rise. You skim dozens of articles and stop only at headlines saying an investor's pour money into X. You read it as confirmation, ignoring contrary analyses. If the stock falls, you don't doubt your judgment, you rationalize, the market overreacted, bad news is temporary. That is how the brain protects the ego, by distorting reality. Another powerful influence is memory. We think we remember the past accurately, but memory is not a faithful recording, it is reconstruction. Each recall rewrites the story, details that fit current beliefs are kept, contradictions are dropped. The narrative in our head changes, not according to truth, but according to inner needs. Charlie Munger once said, "Learn to ask not where am I right, but where might I be wrong?" That requires courage, the courage to admit that what we believe may be the product of circumstance, instinct, and bias. Courage to peel away layers of perceptual armor and face a world far grayer than we imagined. Consider a common situation: you have a bad meal at a restaurant. Next time someone mentions it, you immediately dismiss it, don't go, terrible. But perhaps the chef was sick that day, or you were in a bad mood. You judge an entire system based on one interaction, and it becomes etched in your mind as truth. That is how biases form, quickly, simply, and very hard to correct. Yet it is not hopeless. The starting point of good thinking is self-awareness, understanding that you too are easily deceived by yourself. We cannot eliminate bias entirely, but we can learn to spot it, like a sailor who cannot control the wind but can adjust the sails. One effective strategy is probabilistic thinking. Instead of asking am I right or wrong, ask what is the probability I am right. This forces risk evaluation, assumption checking, and broader context viewing. It makes us more open to new information because we are not defending an absolute position, we are merely calibrating confidence based on evidence. Probabilistic thinking also means accepting uncertainty. And that makes many uncomfortable. The brain craves certainty, it creates a feeling of control. But the world does not operate that way. There are things we don't know, and things we don't know we don't know. Recognizing this is the first step toward wisdom. Wisdom does not come from having more information, it comes from knowing how limited we are in processing that information. You can read hundreds of books, but if you don't know how to read yourself, your biases, prejudices, fears, and outdated beliefs, you remain trapped in an old mental box. One of the most powerful tools for clearer self-view is the concept of mental models. Charlie Munger called it a latticework of mental models, a collection of fundamental principles from many fields: biology, psychology, physics, economics, mathematics. They allow us to see the world not through one lens but through many interlocking lenses. For example, from psychology we recognize confirmation bias. From economics we learn scarcity and incentives. From physics we understand nonlinear systems where small inputs cause huge outputs. From biology we grasp natural selection and adaptation. When combined, we see a more complex but truer world. Instead of seeking a universal formula, we learn to apply the right lens to each situation. But this requires intellectual humility, a rare quality in a modern world obsessed with appearing knowledgeable. Humility does not mean paralyzing self-doubt, it means understanding that all knowledge can be wrong or incomplete. It is the willingness to question answers rather than cling to them. One of the most frightening manifestations of flawed thinking is when it becomes collective, when a group shares a bias and reinforces it mutually. This is called groupthink. You see it in boardrooms, politics, corporate meetings. When no one dares speak against the flow, the group slides into error believing everyone agrees. A famous experiment illustrates this. A subject is placed in a group of actors pretending to be volunteers. They are asked to judge the length of 3 lines. The correct answer is obvious, but the actors deliberately choose wrong. The real subject, fearing exclusion, often picks the wrong answer too, not because they cannot see, but because they fear standing out. This is the root of many historic disasters, financial bubbles, senseless wars. When no one speaks against the tide, wrong becomes truth, and catastrophe follows. Good thinking, therefore, is not just an individual skill, it is an act of courage. Courage to think differently, to stand alone when necessary, to doubt what seems obvious. But distinguish healthy skepticism from blind conspiracy thinking. True skepticism seeks deeper understanding, not reflexive opposition. We must learn to ask better questions. Not how can I be right, but what if I am wrong? Not what do others think, but what do I see that they might miss? Not is this true, but what evidence makes me think it is true, and what evidence supports the opposite? Darwin had an admirable habit. Whenever he encountered evidence contradicting his hypothesis, he wrote it down immediately, because he knew he would otherwise forget or ignore it. That is the mindset of someone seeking truth, not confirmation. Instead of proving ourselves right, we should try to understand why we might be wrong. Instead of clinging to a simple, predictable world, learn to live with complexity and ambiguity. Build a solid foundation of perception from fundamental principles. Ultimately, good thinking does not guarantee you will always be right, it helps you be wrong less often. And when wrong, know how to correct. It does not shield you from pain or failure, but it lets you learn more from each fall. Most importantly, it grants a rare privilege in this noisy world, sovereignty over your own perception and freedom in thought. Part 2. The Psychology of Wrong Judgments. Mistakes, when looked at directly, are the harshest but most honest teachers life offers. No one can avoid them entirely. What separates us is not the number of mistakes we make, but how we think about them. Wrong judgments, from small daily decisions to life-altering errors, stem from one source. Our own minds contain subtle, systematic distortions we rarely notice. I call this the psychology of erroneous judgment, a dense forest filled with invisible traps set by evolution, emotion, memory, and old beliefs. If we do not learn to recognize them, we walk straight in, step on them repeatedly, and eventually run out of chances to turn back. Let's start with the most common trap, the illusion of understanding. You enter a situation, observe a few signals, draw a conclusion, and believe you know what's happening. In reality, you don't, you are simply pasting fragments of past experience onto the present and calling it intuition. Imagine seeing someone dressed sloppily, stammering, unsteady on their feet. Your brain instantly concludes, this person is untrustworthy. But what if you later learn they just survived a car accident or suffer from a neurological condition? Everything changes. You weren't wrong because of missing information, you were wrong because you jumped to a conclusion from an incomplete picture. Darwin Munger emphasized that the illusion of knowledge is the most dangerous form of ignorance because it stops you from seeking truth. This illusion opens the door to dozens of other cognitive biases I will unpack one by one. First, the anchoring effect, one of the brain's most pervasive tricks. When you hear a number first, even a random one, subsequent judgments orbit around it. If I ask whether an item is more or less expensive than 5 million VND, you are anchored at 5 million. If I anchor you at 20 million instead, your answer shifts, even though the item's true value remains unchanged. We believe we judge based on intrinsic worth. In truth, we are heavily influenced by arbitrary starting points. Anchors appear everywhere: negotiations, pricing, investing, judging people. They quietly pull us far from reality. Next, confirmation bias, the mechanism that makes us seek only information that fits our existing beliefs while ignoring or dismissing contradictory evidence. If you believe successful people wake up early, you remember stories of Tim Cook or Howard Schultz rising at 4 a.m. and conveniently forget that many others, including some extraordinarily successful ones, sleep until noon. Your brain edits reality to justify belief rather than test it. Confirmation bias explains why arguments are often futile. Each side isn't truly listening, they are hunting for ammunition to reinforce their own position. When someone presents opposing evidence, instead of reflection we switch to defense mode. Logic is crushed by emotion. Truth is replaced by a self-serving version of truth. Then there is the halo effect. We assign an entire set of positive qualities to someone based on one standout trait. You meet someone articulate, well-dressed, confident, and instantly assume they are intelligent, trustworthy, and successful. But that is merely the shadow of a first impression, like seeing a sparkling diamond and assuming it is priceless without checking clarity, carat, or origin. Mistakes do not only arise when judging others, they arise when judging ourselves. One powerful bias is the illusion of superiority. Most people believe they are above average in almost every domain. The irony, if everyone is above average, who is below? Average students think they're good at school. Losing investors believe they have long-term vision. Poor drivers think they just need a little more focus. This is not confidence, it is delusion. That delusion is reinforced by another bias, outcome bias. We judge decisions based on results rather than the quality of the decision-making process. If someone bets their entire fortune on tech stocks and gets rich, we call them a genius. If they lose everything, we call them a fool. Yet in both cases, the correct evaluation should focus on whether the decision was reasonable given what was known at the time, not on the random outcome. You can be right by luck, you can be wrong even when you did everything correctly. This distinction matters enormously in high uncertainty fields, investing, entrepreneurship, medicine, strategy. Another common error, conformity bias, or group behavior bias. We adjust our perceptions, even our morals, to fit the group. You see everyone in the room agreeing with a terrible idea. Instead of objecting, you stay silent. Eventually you may even convince yourself you were wrong. The brain cannot tolerate exclusion, so it distorts reality to make us feel we belong. This explains why large organizations can commit catastrophic mistakes while no one speaks up. Even simple experiments prove it. When a group deliberately chooses an obviously wrong answer, the real participant often conforms, knowing it is wrong but fearing isolation. Truth is suffocated not by force, but by silence. Then comes loss aversion. We hate losses more than we love equivalent gains. The pain of losing $1 is far greater than the pleasure of gaining $1. That is why we hold losing investments hoping for a turnaround instead of cutting losses, while we quickly sell winners fearing the profit will vanish. We let losses run and cut profits short, the opposite of rational. Loss aversion turns us into emotional hostages. Instead of acting according to logic and long-term goals, we react to immediate fear. It also drives defensive decisions whose cost far exceeds any benefit. Imagine losing 1 million VND in an incident. You might spend 5 million just to restore justice, even though the damage is already done. A wounded ego sometimes costs more than money. Deeper still lies post hoc rationalization. We act impulsively, emotionally, even irrationally, then invent reasons afterward to justify it. Reason comes after the action, not before. We do not live by logic, we live by instinct, then wrap the instinct in fake logic to convince ourselves. This avoids cognitive dissonance, the pain of knowing we are irrational. Someone buys a car costing twice their annual income. Afterward they talk about safety, long-term value, stability. But the real driver was the thrill of ownership. Emotion-led, reason excused. If you asked them before buying whether it was rational, they might hesitate. After the purchase, the answer becomes of course. This is why wrong judgments are not accidents, they are inevitable consequences of how the brain operates. Without deliberate effort to identify, dissect, and learn from them, We remain trapped in a chain of decisions that feel right but are wrong. Like walking through fog thinking it is bright sunshine, only realizing the truth when we fall off the cliff. Try pausing for a moment and observing just one day of your life. You will notice how many cognitive distortions you fall into without realizing it. You wake up, scroll through the news, and linger only on headlines that match your existing views. You go on social media, see someone showcasing achievements, and immediately assign them a full set of positive traits: smart, hardworking, talented leader. You meet someone outside who looks unkempt and you don't give them a chance to finish a sentence. You eat lunch at the usual place because you always go there. In the evening you look at your profit and loss sheet and tell yourself, "Today I thought rationally." Our ego is extremely skilled at storytelling. It creates a smooth, coherent, logical narrative to justify a disjointed, emotional, biased chain of actions. We love good stories, especially when the main character is ourselves. But if we do not stop to dissect the hidden mechanisms, what we call thinking is merely a hasty draft scribbled in the darkness of the unconscious. And so we move to an even more dangerous form of distortion, the conflation of emotion with truth. Feeling afraid does not mean there is real danger. Feeling confident does not mean you are on the right path. Feeling certain does not mean you are correct. Yet in the brain, emotion is the strongest data point. It can override logic, warp memory, and obscure warning signs. Emotion gives rise to one major consequence: irrational evaluation of probability. The human brain is poor at intuitive probability thinking. We overestimate the risk of plane crashes compared to car accidents because plane crashes are more dramatic. We fear sharks more than drowning in the bathtub because sharks appear in movies. We judge the success probability of a startup based on one inspiring success story rather than the 90% overall failure rate. Emotion tied to vivid images makes us prioritize salient information over accurate information. This is called the availability heuristic, or availability bias. If an example is easy to visualize, close to home, or emotionally charged, we judge its probability as higher than it actually is. You hear about someone winning the lottery 3 times in a row and think that could happen to me. You read about a startup that raised funding at lightning speed and think my idea is just as good. You remember the one rare case where someone was saved by an unconventional treatment and ignore the statistic that it fails 99% of the time. When something is missing, the brain fills the gap. But it fills it with what? Personal experience, fleeting emotions, old beliefs. Imagination gets populated by memories, prejudices, media, and simplification. We do not evaluate events as they are, we evaluate them as we can most easily recall or narrate them. The availability heuristic is what media and advertising exploit to the maximum. They do not need to change facts, they just need to tell a better story. A bizarre accident, a rare disease, a young entrepreneur who made it big, each becomes an anchor, a trigger, a vivid proof that convinces millions the world runs on emotional logic. Another widespread but less discussed bias, the sunk cost fallacy. You have invested in a failing project, but because you have already poured in so much time and money, you cannot stop. You keep adding hope because you feel sorry for what has already been lost. Reason says cut your losses, emotion says preserve dignity. The result, you dig the hole deeper. Sunk cost fallacy keeps us in toxic relationships, wrong ideas, inefficient strategies, simply because we do not want them to have been for nothing. But the truth is, money and time already lost cannot come back. The only relevant question is whether the next decision is worth what remains. If not, stop. Regret does not resurrect lost value, it only prolongs the damage. One of the most subtle mechanisms that leads us to misjudge comes from evolution itself, the tendency to seek simple single causes for complex phenomena. The brain evolved for survival. It has no time to analyze tangled systems every time something happens. Instead, it picks the easiest to understand, easiest to remember, easiest to tell story and assigns it as the cause. Think of a child getting poor grades. Instead of examining the curriculum, teaching methods, family pressure, mental health, the quick conclusion is lazy or not smart. Simple explanation, but wrong. And when the explanation is wrong, the action is wrong, like pressing the wrong fire alarm button on the third floor while the fire starts on the first. This oversimplification tendency also drives us to look for someone to blame. Project fails, find a person. Country in chaos, blame the leader. Negative trend emerges, find who started it. Assigning a single culprit makes the brain feel the problem is solved. But reality is deeper, every cause has causes beneath it. Related is the fundamental attribution error. We attribute others' success or failure to their character while ignoring circumstances. Someone gets rich, they are skilled, bold, business-minded. Someone fails, they are incompetent, undisciplined. But for ourselves, bad market, bad luck, lack of support. We judge others by outcomes and ourselves by context. This completely distorts our worldview, especially dangerous when we are in leadership or decision-making roles. If we fail to recognize systemic factors, we end up rewarding or punishing the wrong things. Another bias few notice, consistency bias, or commitment and consistency. Once we publicly state an opinion, many of us cling to it, not because we still believe it is true, but because we do not want to contradict our past self. Changing one's mind is seen as weak, flip-flopping, lacking principle. Yet it may actually be a sign of intelligence. Darwin Munger said, "Each year I try to change at least one major belief. If I can't, it means I haven't learned anything." Most of us, however, work hard to prove we haven't changed, as if unchanging views signal strength. This makes us cling to mistakes simply because they were once our choices. Then there is the illusion of control. We like to believe we control outcomes. Success comes from talent, effort, personal strategy. Failure comes from personal error. But in many cases, success and failure contain far more luck than we admit. You can do everything right and still fail. You can make a string of mistakes and still succeed, because the world does not run on simple cause and effect. It is influenced by thousands of factors: timing, market, trends, people, geography, technology, crowd psychology. And in each factor, probability plays a huge role. The illusion of control causes us to overcredit ourselves in success and be overly harsh in failure. It prevents learning from good fortune and forgiving ourselves for honest mistakes. It is an illusion that must be dismantled to understand that much of life's good is a combination of effort, system, and a dash of luck. So how do we avoid these distortions? In truth, we cannot eliminate them completely, they are part of human nature. But we can name them, recognize them, and thereby reduce their power. Like a nearsighted person cannot cure their eyes but can wear glasses to see clearly. Wearing glasses here means building a system of bias prevention, not relying on gut feeling but on principles. One of the strongest principles: pause and review before every important decision. Ask yourself, what am I thinking right now? What makes me think that? Do I have contradictory evidence? Am I clinging to emotion, prejudice, or old belief? Who could honestly challenge me if I am wrong? What is the cost? If I am right, could it still be due to chance? These questions are not meant to paralyze you, they are meant to help you move forward with clarity. We do not need to remove bias entirely, we only need to weaken its grip at the most critical moments. You also need to build a healthy environment for dissent. Do not surround yourself only with people who agree with you, seek out those who think differently and respect them for it. A group of like-minded people can create false confidence and repeat collective mistakes. A group with diverse views and healthy debate culture can prevent cognitive disasters. Learn from Charles Darwin. He wrote down evidence against his hypotheses the moment he found it, because he knew his brain would quickly forget or rationalize it away. That is intellectual humility, understanding we are fallible creatures, so we must proactively work against ourselves. Do not trust intuition blindly. Intuition is reliable when built on repeated experience with clear feedback, like a chess master or surgeon. But in complex, low-feedback environments, intuition misfires easily. If you have not faced hundreds of similar situations, your gut is less trustworthy than simple analysis. A simple but powerful strategy: write down your decision before acting, record the reasons, expectations, risks. Then, when the outcome arrives, good or bad, go back and evaluate. Were my reasons sound? What did I miss? Which bias did I fall into? Over time you build a library of mistakes and a library of wisdom. Good thinking does not guarantee you will always be right, but it ensures that every time you are wrong, you learn something. You become less stubborn, less smug, less driven by impulse. And thus, gradually, you become someone less easily deceived by yourself. Mistakes do not kill you. But an ego that refuses to admit fault kills the opportunity to correct. The world does not punish you for making mistakes, it punishes you for failing to learn from them. And you will never learn if you always believe you are right. The wisest person is the one who knows most clearly how easily they can be wrong. And that quiet, vigilant awareness of potential error is the true foundation of the best decisions. Part 3: Physics and Mathematics in Thinking Mistakes. Mistakes in thinking do not only arise from emotions or murky perceptions, they also stem from mathematics. Not because we cannot count, but because the human brain is not wired to intuitively grasp probability, exponential growth, or non-linear responses. These belong to the realm of physics and mathematics, yet they profoundly govern everyday decisions. Imagine you have two choices. Receive 10 million VND today. Receive 1 cent today, but the amount doubles every day for 30 days. Most people instinctively choose the first option. Why? Because they cannot intuitively feel the power of exponential, compound, growth. Yet if you start with 1 cent and double it daily for 30 days, the final amount exceeds 100 million VND. This is not fantasy, it is simple mathematics. The brain simply does not feel it. We do not live in a linear world. Although most decisions are processed as if everything increases steadily, decreases steadily, or fluctuates evenly, the real world, finance, biology, technology, society, operates on curving, sudden, unpredictable paths. You keep pouring water into a full glass. Nothing spills until the very last drop. That is the breaking point, the tipping point, the fracture where intuition fails. Another example: joint probability. The chance of a car accident on any given day is small. The chance of a car accident and being delayed by rain is even smaller. But if I tell you a vivid story about a friend who crashed yesterday because they were late in a downpour, you will feel it is plausible, relatable, easy to picture, and you will unconsciously judge the combined probability as higher than it really is. This is the conjunction fallacy, or conjunction bias. A complex combined event is judged more likely than any single component of it. The brain prefers concrete stories over abstract probabilities. Instead of looking at a 1% chance, we want to know, has anyone actually experienced this? What did it look like? Do I know someone like that? But probability does not care about feelings. It is just numbers, unchanged whether we fear it or believe it. When we fail to understand probability, we consistently misjudge both risks and opportunities. Mathematical distortions appear starkly when evaluating expected value. You see an investment that could return 1 billion VND, and you pour money in because the number sounds huge. But if the probability of winning is only 1/10, the expected value is just 100 million VND. Another investment might return 500 million VND with 50% probability. Expected value equals 250 million VND. Which is more rational? Most people do not calculate, they chase the impressive headline number. Darwin Munger always said, think in terms of probabilities. Don't ask, could it happen? Ask, well, what is the probability? Probability lacks drama. It has no emotion, no characters, no climax. So we ignore it and pay the price. Lack of statistical literacy affects not just individuals but organizations and entire societies. Look at how media reports risks. If a drug has a 1% chance of side effects, the headline reads, "This miracle drug can kill." People panic. But almost no one asks, what is the actual probability? What are the benefits? How does it compare to baseline natural risk? This is statistical innumeracy in action. The brain is terrible at relative risk. Hearing that something doubles the risk of cancer sounds terrifying, even if it moves from 1% to 2%. The absolute change is tiny, but the framing creates widespread fear. Or consider the availability illusion of rare events. If we hear daily stories of lottery winners, the brain starts believing winning is reasonably possible, even though the odds are 1 in millions. We know the math, but emotional closeness through vivid winners makes the improbable feel near. Another key concept: non-linear response. Input does not scale proportionally with output. Doubling effort does not always double results. Sometimes a tiny additional change creates a massive leap. Sometimes massive effort barely moves the needle. If we do not grasp non-linearity, we become perpetually disappointed or wrongly expectant. Learning a new skill, rapid early progress, then plateau despite more practice. Losing weight, fast initial drop, then stall. Without understanding non-linearity, we assume we are doing something wrong when we are simply encountering the natural shape of complex systems, thresholds, limits, delays. Non-linearity also causes us to misjudge cumulative phenomena. Debt does not grow steadily, it accumulates slowly, then explodes. Trust in a relationship takes years to build but can shatter in one act, and repair is rarely proportional. Damage in the real world often has no linear recovery path. Paradox: things that are easy to measure, profits, metrics, time, are the most easily misunderstood if detached from system context. Things hard to measure, trust, resilience, structural durability, are often ignored, yet they exert massive non-linear leverage. Misunderstanding this leads to strategic errors, investment failures, and sometimes total collapse. Another mathematical trap: the misleading average. You hear that the average monthly income in a country is 10 million VND. That does not mean most people earn 10 million. In skewed distributions, like income, the average is pulled up by a tiny ultra-rich group. The majority may live far below. Average tells you nothing about the typical experience, yet we use it as the yardstick. You have 1 foot in boiling water and 1 in ice. On average, your body temperature is normal, but the feeling is very different. Averages become illusions when we ignore distribution shape, outliers, skewness. When we project the past linearly into the future, we are again. Stock market up 10% in 6 months, we assume it will continue the same way. Child does well for 2 years, we believe they will keep excelling. We love continuity. That is when we are most deceived. Reality: most systems are cyclical. Growth, saturation, decline, adjustment, recovery or collapse. Nothing extends forever linearly. But the brain extrapolates the present as representative of the entire future curve. That is when we place the biggest bets on broken models. Classic example: asset bubbles. Initial price rise may be rational, scarcity, genuine demand. Then price attracts more participants, not for real need, but for quick gain expectation. Price no longer reflects value, it reflects emotion and momentum. When expectation peaks, one small bad signal can collapse confidence like dominoes. In complex systems, there are breaking points, thresholds where accumulated energy suddenly reverses direction. Mathematics calls them instability thresholds. Life calls them crises. Individuals call them "I never thought it would happen so fast." Even in nature, large transformations often come from tiny amplified fluctuations. A tornado does not start with a big wind, it builds from microscopic energy accumulations. This applies to finance, politics, health, social behavior. Without understanding accumulation and nonlinearity, we are perpetually surprised and too slow to respond. Another pure mathematics lesson: asymmetry of gains and losses. If your wealth drops 50%, you need a 100% gain just to break even. Loss and gain are not symmetric. That is why preventing catastrophic loss matters far more than chasing extreme gains. You win 10%, then lose 10%, you think you are even. In reality you are down, and if you lose another 20%, you need plus 25% just to recover. The real world punishes losses asymmetrically. Hence Munger and Buffett's famous rule. Rule number 1, don't lose money. Rule number 2, never forget rule number 1. It sounds simplistic, but behind it lies deep understanding of nonlinearity and the mathematics of damage. Physics and mathematics also teach indirect effects, or second-order consequences. You change one small thing, but it ripples through chains of interaction to produce massive outcomes. Example, tweak a social media algorithm, seems minor, changes what content gets promoted, alters user emotions, amplifies polarization, influences elections. We usually see only first-order effects, I do A get B. Second and third-order effects hide the real risks. In nonlinear systems, these effects are not proportional, they are delayed, amplified, cascading. Like a marble rolling on an inclined plane, small perturbations can push the system into entirely new states with no return. This is path dependence or irreversibility. Many people naively assume that after disruption, things can revert to the original state. But in reality, many phenomena have no reverse gear. You cannot restore a relationship to exactly what it was after trust is broken. You cannot erase brand damage from a terrible business decision. Harm has structure, and its consequences rarely follow linear logic. That is why we must understand phase transitions. From physics, when a system crosses a critical threshold, old rules no longer apply. You cannot control a tsunami with dam-building rules. You cannot manage a crisis of confidence with economic indicators alone. A deadly mistake, applying equilibrium zone rules to chaotic zones. The 2008 global financial crisis is a textbook case. Many risk models assumed events followed a normal, bell curve, distribution, extreme events rare and low impact. Reality, fat tails, extremes happen far more often and with far greater force. The math was not wrong. The model assumptions were catastrophically wrong. Another important mathematical concept is signal versus noise. Not all data contains meaningful information. Many fluctuations are purely random, noise, without representing any real trend or underlying truth. Yet if we cannot distinguish signal from noise, we overreact to every small movement and get trapped in unnecessary cycles of decision-making. Imagine you are a long-term investor in a solid company. The stock price drops 2% in one day, you panic and sell. Or you track daily health metrics and see your heart rate slightly elevated after one poor night's sleep, you immediately worry, research symptoms, rearrange your schedule. That is reacting to noise, not signal. In a world drowning in data, the ability to separate the two is a survival skill. So how do we survive in a world full of noise, non-linearity, and uncertainty? The answer is not to eliminate all risk, that is impossible. It is to design thinking and action systems that are resilient. This brings to mind a concept from physics and biology, antifragility or resilience. A bamboo tree survives storms not because it is stronger than steel, but because it bends. It does not break, it is flexible. Good mathematical thinking in an uncertain world is not about finding the perfectly accurate answer. It is about defining acceptable error margins. Instead of asking which scenario will happen, a good thinker asks, what is the worst-case scenario? How much can I withstand? At what point does my system break? Munger calls this inversion or avoiding stupidity. Being brilliant is hard, but avoiding idiotic mistakes is a massive step forward. In finance, this means no excessive leverage, no concentrating all assets in one place, always leaving room for error. In personal life, do not bet reputation, health, or trust on uncertain things. In strategic decisions, design choices so that even if wrong, you do not lose everything. Another powerful mental tool, range estimates instead of point estimates. Instead of saying growth will definitely be 10%, say growth is likely in the 5 to 15% range with 80% probability. This reflects the uncertain nature of reality and prevents false precision and overconfidence. Mathematics also teaches us about the asymmetry of expectation in tail events. When low probability, high impact events occur, wars, pandemics, technological breakthroughs, their expected value can be enormous even though their probability is tiny. This is Nassim Taleb's black swan concept, rare, unpredictable events with outsized consequences. The world is disproportionately shaped by these black swans, not by average, predictable fluctuations. Therefore, instead of trying to predict exactly, a robust mindset prepares for the unexpected, not in a paranoid way, but by building systems that can survive and adapt. Like a mountaineer carrying safety ropes, not because he expects to fall, but because he knows the unforecastable must be accounted for. A crucial part of mathematical thinking is recognizing risk-reward asymmetry. Not every high-probability bet is worth taking if the reward is small relative to the downside. Conversely, some low-probability bets are attractive if the payoff is huge and failure cost is limited. This is how great value investors, entrepreneurs, and historical strategists operate. A single bet with only 20% chance of success, but 10 times payoff on win and small loss on failure, looks reckless in isolation. But repeated over 100 independent trials, a few wins can generate enormous returns. Most people emotionally dislike losing many times to win big, but mathematics cares only about long-term expectation, not momentary feelings. Finally, perhaps the deepest lesson mathematics teaches is humility. Mathematics does not allow cheating. It is indifferent to belief, emotion, status, or personal narrative. It is simply law. That cold indifference makes mathematics a merciless but accurate mirror, reflecting every illusion we build in our heads. Understanding the physics and mathematics of thinking mistakes does not turn you into a superhuman. But it makes you significantly less blind, less naive, less easily seduced by things that sound reasonable but are completely wrong. Because in the end, wisdom is not knowing everything, it is knowing precisely where you are most likely to be wrong. Part 4. Guidelines for Better Thinking. After dissecting all these sources of error, from evolutionary instincts, psychological distortions, perceptual biases, physics, and mathematics, we face the unavoidable question. So how do we actually think better? The answer is not to become a genius. It is to build a deliberate thinking system that performs better than our default, automatic human mode. Good thinking is not a sudden flash of correct intuition. It is a sequence of intentional actions, a framework, a lattice, a checklist, a set of operating principles that protects us from our own instincts. The first step sounds almost silly. Notice when you are actually thinking. Have you ever paused mid-decision and asked, what mental tool am I using to reach this conclusion right now? Most of the time, no, because the brain prefers reacting over reflecting. So step 1, turn on the light. Become aware that you are in a situation that requires thinking, not autopilot action, not impulsive this feels right so do it. Even 1 second of pause, 1 moment of meta-awareness, creates a new space for real cognition. Next, audit your data sources. What information are you basing this on? Where did it come from? Is it sufficient? Are you cherry-picking to fit preconceptions or honestly surveying the field? Are you confusing feelings with facts? Munger called this cleaning the lens, like a scientist wiping the microscope before examining the specimen. Then, scan for biases. Am I falling for confirmation bias, seeking only supporting evidence? Am I influenced by the crowd? Am I reacting emotionally rather than rationally? Am I anchored to an arbitrary number? Misled by averages? Swayed by vivid availability? Terrified of loss? Caught in any of the traps we discussed? Each question is a flashlight into the dark corners. It does not guarantee correctness, but at least you know what path you are walking, and whether it might be an illusion. Next, apply multiple models. Never view a problem through a single lens. Ask, what biological principle is at work? What physics law applies? What does psychology say? If I look at this economically? Through probability? The more models you bring, the less likely any single flawed lens will deceive you. Charlie Munger called this the latticework of mental models. When a new problem arrives, throw it against the lattice and see which nodes catch the core truth. This is interdisciplinary, not deep specialization, and it is far more powerful than single-discipline blindness. Then, perhaps the most important, doubt yourself as if you were your own adversary. Step outside yourself. Play devil's advocate against your own position. How would you attack your current argument if you wanted to destroy it? What facts are you conveniently ignoring? What possibilities are you downplaying? This is high-level metacognition, not just what do I think, but where could I be wrong, and how would I hide it from myself? Darwin succeeded not because he had brilliant ideas, but because he refused to fully trust his own ideas. Whenever he found contradicting evidence, he wrote it down immediately, knowing his brain would soon erase or distort it. The most dangerous enemy of clear thinking is not external opposition, it is the internal ego always protecting what it already believes. Next, separate yourself from outcomes. If you make a good decision but the result is bad, can you avoid self-blame? If you make a bad decision but luck delivers a good outcome, can you avoid taking credit? Good thinking evaluates process, not single-instance results. Think of a doctor who chooses a well-reasoned treatment based on all available data, yet the patient dies. That is not necessarily a bad decision. Conversely, a reckless doctor who gambles on a hunch and the patient miraculously survives is not necessarily a good thinker. In a probabilistic world, we cannot judge isolated outcomes. We must examine context, model, data, logic. Another rule: when uncertain, slow down. We often equate speed with intelligence, reflex with sharpness. But in most high-stakes situations, haste is the enemy of understanding. If you feel the urge to just decide and move on, or this feels right so act now, or I might miss the opportunity, that is exactly when you should pause. Time is an ally of thought. Even a brief delay to recheck assumptions, ask one more question, or view from another angle can completely change the decision. You do not need to be slow in everything, but you must know when to be slow. Another principle: think in probabilities, not certainties. Every conclusion you reach should carry a confidence level, not just true, false. Example: I believe this is correct with roughly 70% probability. Probabilistic thinking makes you more flexible, more open to new data, less attached to old beliefs. It also prevents a very common error: I was right once, so I'll be right again, confusing a favorable probabilistic outcome with inevitability. Finally, do not aim to always be right, aim to understand. People obsessed with being right become defensive, ignore disconfirming evidence, distort reality. People who want to understand stay open, listen, update beliefs. Only those who seek understanding can sustainably change themselves. Imagine you walk into a room full of strangers. Each person carries their own views, beliefs, past experiences. If you enter with the mindset "I came here to win the argument," your entire experience becomes combat. You pick sides, counterattack, hunt for weaknesses in others. But if you enter with the mindset "I came here to understand," everything changes. You listen. You ask questions. You dig deeper. You discover perspectives you had never considered before. Good thinking is not a pistol, it is a magnifying glass. It is not for attacking, it is for exploring. You do not always need to debate, but you always need curiosity. Curiosity is the quiet flame that prevents thinking from hardening into dogma. At a deeper level, you need to build your own personal mental map, a kind of internal situation recognition system, where real-life scenarios are quickly linked to the most appropriate models. For example, when you see explosive rapid growth, ask yourself, is this linear or exponential? Is there bubble potential? When someone speaks fluently and exudes confidence, remind yourself, am I being seduced by the halo effect? When a group reaches consensus too quickly, flag it, is this healthy agreement or dangerous groupthink? Continuously connecting models to real situations is the only way to turn theory into lived practice. Knowing about cognitive biases intellectually means nothing if you cannot spot them operating inside yourself in real time. All that knowledge remains just an intellectual coat, impressive but useless. Darwin Munger called this daily practice of mental models like exercising a muscle. Thinking develops only through consistent use, not through occasional inspiration but through habit. And the habit starts with always asking, what models am I using right now? If no model is consciously engaged, you are reacting on instinct, and every bias can sneak in like a thief in the night. Another crucial guideline: do not overvalue complexity. A simple, robust, practical model often outperforms a hyper-complex system that even its creator cannot fully control. Many people who study deeply fall into the trap of thinking more models equal smarter. Intelligence lies not in quantity but in knowing which model fits the situation and when to ignore every model entirely. A truly sharp mind knows what to use and, more importantly, what not to use. Another lesson I learned from Munger: treat every mistake as tuition, but unlike regular tuition, it is wasted if you do not record the lesson. When you err, dissect it ruthlessly. Why exactly did I go wrong? At which step? Which bias was active? Which model did I miss or misapply? If you skip this autopsy, you keep paying tuition without ever earning the degree. Keep a thinking journal, not for self-punishment, but for self-observation, like a scientist watching a lab rat, yourself. Over time you will spot repeating patterns, your favorite blind spots, your go-to rationalizations, the models you chronically neglect. Recognizing those patterns is the true beginning of personal cognitive evolution. One more simple but extraordinarily powerful rule: when you do not know, say, "I do not know." This is not just humility, it is a protective strategy. The instant you say, "I know," your brain stops searching. But when you admit uncertainty, you keep the door open for new data, new models, new flexibility. One of the rarest skills in today's world is the ability to delay conclusion, tolerating ambiguity. We hate uncertainty, so we rush to label everything: right, wrong, good or bad, believe you don't believe. But many issues cannot be resolved immediately. Some phenomena need more data. Some people cannot be understood from one behavior. The capacity to sit comfortably with not yet clear is a hallmark of a mature mind. Imagine reading an emergency report. Instead of reacting instantly, put it down and ask: do I have enough data yet? Is someone emphasizing one angle while ignoring another? What perspective am I missing? That small pause, between instinctive reaction and deliberate reasoning, is where real thinking is born. In a noisy world, quick reaction is often praised as sharpness. Yet the greatest minds are frequently slow, not because they lack speed, but because they refuse to be intellectually lazy. They hold multiple possibilities in mind simultaneously, weigh hypotheses carefully, endure uncertainty until truth gradually emerges. Another practical rule: when everyone agrees too quickly, become suspicious. Rapid, effortless consensus is often a red flag for groupthink, people avoiding disagreement to preserve belonging, or simply assuming someone else already thought it through deeply. Danger: no one is actually thinking, everyone thinks someone else did. A good thinking group is one that can argue without breaking trust, where saying "I disagree" is contribution, not attack, where dissent is welcomed, not punished. And that only happens when the leader creates psychological safety, where mistakes are learning opportunities, not reasons for blame. You also need to learn to evaluate ideas without emotional contamination. It is very easy to reject an idea just because you dislike the person saying it, or to accept nonsense because the speaker has charisma. Strong thinking separates the messenger from the message. Who says it matters far less than what they say and what evidence backs it. Charlie Munger advised, try to learn from people you don't like. If you only learn from people similar to you, you will never escape your own shadow. This is hard, the ego hates dissonance. But if you train yourself to listen without immediate emotional pushback, you expand your vision and reduce personal prejudice. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, live according to what you think. Nothing is more dangerous than a sharp mind without a heart. Knowledge without ethics is a sharp knife without a handle. It cuts through truth but also wounds conscience. Good thinking should not be merely a tool for success, it should be a way to live more decently. When you think clearly, you hurt others less through misunderstanding. You judge less hastily, act less arrogantly, cling less stubbornly. And from that, you become not only smarter but safer for the people around you. Ultimately, the deepest core of good thinking lies not in techniques but in attitude. The attitude of a perpetual student, not an expert. Someone who does not enter the world with a head full of certainties but with an empty, open mind ready to be filled with things they do not yet know, do not yet understand, or once understood wrongly. They do not fear being wrong because they know mistakes are fuel for insight. They do not resent challenge because challenge is a mirror for their thinking. They do not resent questions, because someone caring enough to question them is a rare gift in a lazy-thinking world. That attitude, lifelong learning, is what transforms thinking from a skill into a character trait. It makes you not only decide better but live more deeply, more generously, less impulsively. And one last thing I want to say, something I learned not from books but from expensive mistakes, genuine regrets, and moments of staring straight at my own limits. No one can think well alone forever. We need others, not to tell us what to think, but to show us what we cannot see by ourselves. An isolated thinking system, no matter how sharp, easily gets trapped in its own loops. A thinking system with external mirrors, resonance, and challenge keeps evolving endlessly. So if you want to think better, build a thinking community. A small circle of people who will tell you when you are wrong, who have the courage to disagree and the kindness to listen. They do not need to be many, just honest, intelligent, and more committed to truth than to agreement. I have seen this in the lives of people I deeply respect. They did not think alone. They built feedback systems. They invited criticism. They learned from both allies and opponents. They understood that in a foggy, noisy world, clarity does not come from external light, it comes from how relentlessly we question ourselves, re-examine assumptions, and dare to see our own boundaries. And if, starting right now, you practice this even a little every day, I believe you will not only become a better thinker, you will become someone who creates deeper, broader, kinder impact in this world. Some books do not give you answers, they hold up a mirror. Seeking wisdom is such a mirror. It does not teach you how to become smart, it gives you reasons to doubt what you call smart. It does not tell you how anyone else thinks, it forces you to confront how you are thinking, every day, every moment. If you have walked with me all the way to the final page of this journey, thank you, not for listening to me, but for having the courage to go deep into a territory most people avoid, the place where we stop blaming circumstances and start looking unflinchingly at the shadows inside ourselves. The place where maturity is not about knowing more, but about understanding exactly how easily we can be wrong. I do not expect you to agree with everything presented here. In fact, I hope the opposite. I hope you argue with it, doubt it, and, if possible, rewrite it through your own experience. Because real knowledge is not born when you finish a book, it is born when you start writing the next chapter of it in your own life. If you found value in this journey, leave a comment, not to praise, but to share what truly stayed with you. Perhaps a passage that hit you personally. Perhaps an idea that made you rethink how you live, choose, think. Your reflections are not just echoes back to me, they may be the beginning for the next person. And if there is any other book, any at all, that you deeply wish could be told in this way, without preaching, without sugarcoating, without forced positivity, a book worthy of being retold with full depth and honesty, please tell me. Perhaps from your suggestion, we will open another journey, no less difficult, and therefore no less essential. Thank you, and I hope to meet you again in the next book.